I'm James Lovelock. I'm an independent scientist, one of the few in the world. I do my science from home, just in the same way that an artist paints his pictures at home, or a novelist writes his novels at home. That has led me to an interesting and peculiar way of life. I see myself very much as a regular scientist. I've always, all my life, wanted to do science, above all things. I think I probably am eccentric, in the sense that there are so few independent scientists around, so just being one is in a sense eccentric. But I'm fortunate to live in a country, England, which has, for all its faults, one great virtue: it tolerates eccentricity. My way of life is to research Gaia. The notion that the Earth is a self-regulating system. The assemblage of all the living organisms on the Earth, together with the air, the ocean and the rocks, formed in a system from which emerged the capacity to self-regulate and to keep the planet always habitable for life. And always has done so since life began. To do this, you have to be independent. Had I worked in a university or an institute of science, it would not have been possible to research on so, how can I put it, unconventional an idea. When I first introduced the idea of the Earth as a system, Gaia, it was at a time when conventional wisdom saw the Earth through the eyes of all of the different separated disciplines of science. The geologists were only interested in the rocks, the air and the oceans. Life was just something that was there that happened to be a passenger. The biologists were quite happy to believe that the geologists described the Earth completely, and all they had to think about was the organisms adapting to the environment that the geologists described. Neither of them realized that life was changing the environment continuously. My idea said that life affects the environment so much that we're evolving not in a world of rocks, air and ocean, just as is, but we're evolving in a world that is made of the breath and the blood and the bones of our ancestors. It was radical. This is my land. It's the land around Combe Mill, where I live and where I came some 25 years ago. What I find rewarding about this place here is that it's Gaia in action. Just take this pond, for example, and those trees behind it. One of the really important cycles of Gaia is the removal of carbon dioxide from the air, which helps to keep the climate of the Earth at a constant level, one that's appreciated by living things. If we didn't have an atmosphere like we have, the Earth would be far, far colder than it is now. It would be a frozen planet, miserable. Just the right amount of carbon dioxide, 300 parts per million, keeps the Earth comfortable, habitable and nice. And the way it does it is this. The trees gather the carbon dioxide from the air and use it for their growth. As they grow, their roots extend in the ground. And when those trees die, all of the carbon they've put down in the ground is eaten by things in the ground. That high concentration reacts rapidly with the rocks and the soil, so that calcium bicarbonate is taken down the river to the ocean, where algae, that's microscopic plants in the ocean, seize it and use it to make their shells, and eventually that carbon dioxide and calcium is deposited as limestone on the ocean floor. And that's the great cycle that looks after the climate of our planet and looks after the composition of the atmosphere. The story of Gaia really began in 1961 when I received a letter from NASA inviting me to join with them in their surveyor mission to the moon.
These unmanned probes from both the Soviet Union and the United States sent back images never before seen by the telescope.
I'd been a scientist working for 20 years before that, mainly in medical research, and also a background as an inventor, making my own equipment. They hired me because I was an instrument expert. I'd invented all manner of sensitive instruments which they thought they'd need to analyze the surface of the moon. And when I got to JPL and started working there, I got to know the biologists, and I found they were designing experiments to detect life on Mars.
However, Mars today still has chemicals on its surface, an atmosphere, temperatures and pressures within which we believe life can exist.
What they all seemed to have in mind was a kind of automated robot laboratory that would be carried to Mars by a spacecraft, and it would solemnly go around as if it was a biologist, take samples of soil and try and grow the organisms in them. And this seemed all a bit unreal to me. How the heck did anybody know if there were any organisms on Mars? And it was a very expensive experiment to send if there weren't. There was a better way to do it, and I kept saying so. All we need to do is to analyze the atmosphere of Mars. If there's life on the planet, it will have changed it in quite a recognizable way. And this is because life has to use the atmosphere as a source of raw materials and as a place to deposit its waste products. And this alters it chemically away from the chemical equilibrium state that you expect of a dead planet. And this is straightforward and simple. Gaia appeared to me in a moment, one of those bits of epiphany. The astronomer called Lou Kaplan had just brought in the infrared data which showed the analysis of the Mars and Venus atmospheres. Now, this data showed clearly that both Mars and Venus had atmospheres very close to what the chemists call the equilibrium state, a lifeless state where no further reactions can take place. And it suddenly dawned on me at that moment, but they're so different from the Earth. Our atmosphere has oxygen and methane mixed. It's potentially explosive. And yet, in spite of being unstable like that, it stays constant for millions of years, that we know. So something must be regulating it. And then it occurred to me that since all the gases virtually were either made by living organisms or massively changed by them, life must be the thing that's regulating the planet. If life can regulate the gases, then it can regulate the climate. And maybe the Earth has always been kept just right for life. In other words, life wasn't just a passenger in the system, a passive kind of entity. It was there as a dynamic part of it, altering it, changing it, always to keep it right for itself.